Tonight I have the opportunity to introduce our speaker, who will give us a presentation on a man that was once called the greatest architect in America by the American Institute of Architecture. That was Frank Lloyd Wright. Mr. Wright was an architect, an interior designer, a writer, an educator, who in his lifetime designed more than 1,000 structures and saw more than 530 of these structures come to life and be completed. Although he died over 50 years ago at the age of 91, his work is still relevant and important today. It would seem fitting that our guest speaker today, Mr. Bill Ross, will tell the story. Bill, who is also a world-class architectural illustrator and an artist, his pen and ink drawings and watercolors are a record of Alberta's past and include such high-profile sites as Banff Springs Hotel, Cardston Temple, Reader Rock Gardens here in Calgary. Please help me welcome Mr. Bill Ross.
Okay. Hi, how are you doing? My name is Bill Ross. I'm not a great speaker, but I like to talk. So that's what I'm going to do. I just want to start off that I'll make this part short. I was on my dad's farm for 4 years. I hated farming, and I just left one fall and went to the Okanagan and ultimately went to Seattle, and had to go back to high school to finish school. And then once I did that, I was doing pretty good, which I wasn't doing well in school. And when I was a kid, like 17, I went to the University of Washington School of Architecture for 3 years, and that's kind of. And then at that time, I remember I was working at a country club, and there was a spoiled daughter of the manager. She asked me, maybe I said I wanted to be an architect, and she said something about Frank Lloyd Wright, and I just looked blank at her. And she said, "You don't know who Frank Lloyd Wright is, and you want to be an architect?" And she just laughed at me. And so then I went to the library and looked up books. And at that time, I wanted to go to Taliesin West, to go to school down there, to be an apprentice. I just never made it. Life got in the way. So with that, I went on and went to Los Angeles. I went to art school, and then I can remember one of my instructors telling me when I was quitting the University of Washington, and I had to go in and tell him, and he says, "Well, what are you going to do, Bill?" And I said, "I'm just going to, I want to be an illustrator, an architectural illustrator." He said, "Whoa, whoa, 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 whoa." He says, that's a mighty big effort there. He says, you need a lot of education. And I really wasn't great at education. So I just started working. I just started drawing old churches and things like that, anything that I could do a picture of. And I just kept going like that. And I at the beginning of my first couple of years, I'd get a job as a draftsman, and a month later they'd fire me. But I learned. I had a month's experience, and I had a job the next day. I always went out and got a new job. And well, by then I had wife and kid. And I did that over and over and over, and I actually added architectural models to it so that I'd be more employable. And I worked that up to working for, or doing some of the work for some of the largest architectural firms in Seattle. And I worked in Portland and Vancouver and Spokane and Los Angeles. And I've been in Denver and Boulder and Toronto, and then of course Calgary, because architecture is a very transient business. So anyways, and I always heard of the Park Pavilion. I knew there was a building up there, and about 4 years ago, I got an interest in it, and 20 years ago, there was a bunch of us illustrators, architectural illustrators, Edmonton, Calgary. We did a series of drawings of historical buildings in Banff. And Les Olenberg's here, he's one of us. And so in this winter scene, the Park Pavilion I did. That was one of them I did, and we all did 2 or 3, and we had a show up in Banff and that stuff. And it was always questionable, why didn't they ever rebuild it, you know? And anyways, that's how I got started. And then I actually did that other rendering, and then I built the model last September. And I met another old gentleman, Doug Gilmore, and he was a professor at the university, and he was very interested in trying to get this rebuilt, and never happened. But now I'm a little mixed up here, but I want to go back to Frank Lloyd Wright, and actually Bill kind of told me some things that I didn't know. But he was born in 1867, 2 years after the Civil War, and I think he was raised in Wisconsin, and his father was a preacher, Harvard educated. His mother was a school teacher, and it's the mother's influence. She always wanted him to be an architect. There, in one of his biographies, they say that when she was pregnant, she knew he was going to be a boy, and she knew he was going to be an architect. And when she went to one of the World's Fairs, she brought a little set of toys, kindergarten toys. They were just blocks and little things, and they were called Ferber, something like that. And she bought this set and brought them home. And that's the basis of all his designs. Is there was little blocks, there was cones, cylinders, and little blocks. And those things he played with and pushed them back and forth all the time. And really all his architecture stems from those little toys. He was in the Chicago area, worked for Sullivan for 7 years. They got into a little fight, he quit, and went on his own. And then he was doing a lot of houses, and I don't know, in 1910 or 15, he did the Unity Temple, and that was his first commercial building, and that was in New York. And so then over the years, he was married 3 different times, lots of children. One of his wife was murdered, some children were murdered, houses burned down, lots and lots of turmoils in his life. He, like most architects, a lot of architects that I knew, they never made money. You know, because a lot of their money, if they were interested in architecture design, their money was spent on design. Not, you know, today most of them probably don't do that. They want to make money. But Frank Lloyd Wright, in 70 years of working, he really was never ahead of the game. He was always begging, borrowing, and stealing. And he'd send his apprentices and that stuff, he would send them out to get the groceries and get the building materials, and they never had any money. They would just charge things, and of course he never paid for things. So it went on and on and on, but just somehow over this roller coaster ride of a life, he just, like Bill said, he just produced so much work. He worked for 70 years. Most people work for 35. You know, the most. And so, and I think he died, he was drawing a month before he died. So he worked all the time and just like to do it. And I don't want to compare myself to Frank Lloyd Wright, but I'm having a tough time giving up my architecture because that's what I've done for 50-some years. And I just like it so much. Anyways, so then he was, I think the Parks Department, Canada Parks Department, they wanted the Park Pavilion, or they wanted a pavilion up in Banff. So they contacted, I think they contacted Frank Lloyd Wright and asked him if he'd be interested in it. And then he said yes, he would. And so he contacted one of his students, which was Francis Sullivan. He was an architect out of Ottawa. And then he would have Canadian connections to go as an associate with him. So Frank Lloyd Wright didn't do this alone, except there's a tennis club, maybe in Pennsylvania or somewhere like that. It's probably gone now. But that's what the pavilion was a copy of. The only thing different was this little clear story up on the top. But the floor plan is pretty well exactly the same. So he really just took an old building, gave it to Sullivan, and said, "Here, draw this up. Let's put a clear story on the top." So really, that's what he probably did. And then so anyways, they designed it and they built it. It was opened up in 1914, and it was used a lot. It was out in that big recreational field that's across the bridge to the kind of the west side there. It's a swamp kind of area, and it was used a lot by people from Mount Royal. They liked to drive out there or get out there, and they'd go in and do hikes and stuff, and then they'd have their picnics in that. So that's what they did. The local people really didn't like it, and they're having the same problem today. Because there's been people offering that they can have it built, and so anyways, there's been, and I think last week there was 3 ladies I met last year doing show and tell. They wanted to help me, and I thought it would be great, but there was nothing I needed help on. So then I introduced them to a man named Michael Miner. He's from down the States somewhere, and anyway, so they've been in contact with him, and I talked to one of the ladies last week, and they have a communications company, and so they're actually working for him right now, and they've made a proposal to Banff last week to have this rebuilt, because Michael Miner said he can have it built, he can raise the money to build it, as long as Banff can use it, and has a need for it, and will upkeep it. So that's it. So that's kind of my talk. So I did quite a bit more than I thought I could. Yes, Sid.
How come it got destroyed again?
It was in that floodplain, and there's a porch right up here. So that's the floor. So it's about 3 feet up, so that high, and it would flood. Well, then the boards would warp, and they would fix them, and they would fix them. The last thing that there was, it was in a little book that I got from the other old architect who was in Vancouver, and he wrote a book on that, but I've lost that book at one of my shows, and the town of Banff was going to get it fixed, and they got Ottawa, the Parks Department, to set aside, or they set aside $500 to redo the floors, and I guess you could do it for, that was in 1938 or 37, and so they appropriated this money, and they were going to come in, I don't know, the spring or the fall or that summer and do it, and there was a little something happened. Whoever was the parks superintendent back in Ottawa, and he had this $500, and I think, I don't know if it was a joke, but somebody said it was the Prime Minister's wife's drunken brother that the Prime Minister had appointed to be Parks Commissioner, and so then. And he decided he wanted to have a party, and he spent the $500 on the party. So the building didn't get fixed. So in the fall of '37, I think they pushed it over with a bulldozer, and then in the spring they just hauled everything away. From what I've read, there's a key somewhere, and we've heard that Brewster might have some of these doors those casement doors in their storage units, but I've got an architect that I know is trying to talk to the family. He knows them, but he's not being very fast about it. And so that's kind of it. And we had a meeting. Our first meeting last year was out in Bragg Creek at Archer's Antiques. I don't know if anybody's ever been there, but Steve Archer's a great guy. He's a good friend, and he's got this arts and crafts house, and he's fixed it all up inside and done built-ins and stuff like that. And there was about 15 people there. And everybody was saying the same thing, that it would be wonderful to have this building up there again, because Banff is such a great area, and every place in the world knows it, and any visitors who come through would go there. So anyway, so there are some people that are very interested in it. Yes?
Has anybody produced an estimate of what it would cost to rebuild?
$2 million.
$2 million?
I think that's what I read. I read this Michael Minder. He said he could have it rebuilt for $2 million. And they would probably do some changes, you know, but they would be careful. I think the changes they would do is because it's, you know, now just about 100 years later. Anybody else?
Are you familiar at all with any Frank Lloyd Wright commissions or Frank Lloyd Wright influences in Calgary architecture?
No, the only thing every once in a while, just lately or last 10, you see there's be a reference to Frank Lloyd Wright, you know, in a Wrightian style, they say, the builders, you know, and that's usually, like his style was those big beams running across or parts of the building. You can see that all over the city, the new ones over the last 5 years. And that's the only thing. He did a house in a little cabin down somewhere in Ontario, and it was one of his clients from Chicago that had some land on an island, and he wanted, and so Frank Lloyd Wright did a little cabin there. It is still there, and but it's been added to. But yeah, I actually had a drawing of it I was going to bring, but I didn't bring everything. Anybody else?
Bill, am I correct, did they fix falling waters?
Yes.
Yes, yeah.
Yes, I think this, for like the last 10 years or something.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it's, how long it's been fixed, maybe 2 or 3, 5 years it's been fixed, but yes, and they had a lot of problems.
Yeah, they did.
And Frank Lloyd Wright was, I don't know how to describe him, but I know that he would do designs, do a design for a house or a project, and he virtually never went on site after he was finished with it. He says, I did it perfect. If they're not going to build it like I designed it, yeah. So he was that way, but he was really, I've got a lot of books. I got 55 books at home, reading a lot of them, and he was just so amazing. And he changed he adapted all the time. And I was, last November, I was down at Taliesin West. I went down there and taught for a week to high school students. I volunteered. I helped the teacher. I didn't teach, but I helped. And I just loved that. We took tours through there, and I got because I was doing that, I got some back seat things like that. And there was when I went into the lunchroom, I was looking around to see who I could, excuse me, pick out that I got to get it just.
Well, I'll get some.
The lunchroom, where I was sitting there and I was looking around, and there was a man came in. He was an older man, and I looked like he was in his 80s, and I thought I recognized, his name was John Rattenbury. His father was the architect for the Empress and the Parliament buildings and a lot of major buildings and a lot of the CP hotels. So, and John Rattenbury, the young, he went, well, his father was killed by a jealous husband. Architects have a problem staying alive, believe me.
Keeping up the tradition there, you go.
Pardon?
Keeping up the tradition?
No. So, I try to be nice. So anyways, his father was killed, and he went and lived in England with one of an aunt or a grandmother, and then the war started, and then he came back and was going to a private school in Vancouver, Victoria. And then he ultimately, when he went to college, he went down into, I think it's in Oregon, and that maybe after the first or second year, one of his friends said, I'm going out to Wisconsin and try to apprentice with Frank Lloyd Wright. And he says, well, I'm going to go. So they drove out there, and so this guy, he went and talked to Frank Lloyd Wright and told him why he wanted to be an architect. And Frank Lloyd Wright says, see you in the spring. Out in, well, that was there, no, see you in the fall, because they went to Arizona in the winter. And so he started, and he's still there. So that's John Rattenbury's son, and he's now 85, 86. And he's one of the fellowship and have carried on, excuse me, just dry, carry on Frank Lloyd Wright's work. So anyways, then there's just, you know, I can't remember, but there's just a million stories about Frank Lloyd Wright because it goes on and on and on. The one thing, when we went through the tour, my wife and sister-in-law, we all went to Arizona, and when we went through the tour, there was a young guy that gave the tour. He was about 27 or something. He was an architect. No, he was an engineer. He maybe he was a teacher or writer or something. He said he didn't like the math. And he was going through, and then there's a pool. And he said, he said, there's grass around. And he said, this is the only grass around Taliesin. And he said, we had the grass at the pool for the children that were born here, or their mothers and fathers came here and worked, and they lived here. And he says, I was born here. So they called us Taliesin babies. So he said, I was here for 8 years. And he was a really nice, interesting young man. And he told us one thing, that Frank Lloyd Wright, when he'd come back from Wisconsin in the fall, he would, first thing he'd do, he'd grab a great big hammer and he'd walk around and he'd just smash walls, smash anything and say, this is going to be rebuilt. And he did it every year, changed every year. And when I was teaching, there was a table, there was a bunch of glass under it, stained glass pieces, and there was a couple of windows. And the lady I was helping, I pointed to those. I said, are those? And she said, yeah. I said, those are real? And she said, oh yeah. And then she said, yeah, we took them out of one building and we're going to put them somewhere else. And I looked on the internet once, and now it was one of his stained glasses from one of the major buildings, but it was $62,000. So if you can find anything Frank Lloyd Wright, there's because of nail or anything that came out of a house or a building, you know, because that stuff's snapped up, and so most of these things I bought, these little cup things, and I've got some gifts a few gifts over here. The little falling water. I think my wife bought me that for Christmas a couple of years ago, and that was fun. All the books. This is how I got my collection. Is all my pictures. I had a bunch of posters and prints in drawers, and I pulled them all out and went through them. And then I would go to thrift stores and find these frames. I'd find a frame that would fit something, and I had a whole bunch of frames like this size. Then I'd cut out a picture and fit it and put a title on it. So I'm making my collection because I can't afford it. And you know, I did the 2 renderings. I've got another rendering at home. I bought the barrel chair, and I bought that here in Calgary. it's licensed, you know, they give license out for furniture, and so that's a real one, and underneath it's signed. I just painted that sign, and those little blocks over there, those are from the Enos house. He went through and did a series of houses using concrete blocks, and that was a stencil that we bought down at Taliesin West, and so I just made that. One day I got tired of working, so I cut out the gray part of it, and I just painted it gray, 2 to 3 different grays, and I splattered it and made it look like concrete. And then I stenciled over top of it. And then I painted the board in the back, and then I screwed that to there, and we hang it up. So I got a really nice Frank Lloyd Wright hanger that's probably worth $200, and I made it in an afternoon. But I've done a lot of murals. Over the years, I've done about 50 murals, and some kind of got a little talent there. So anyways, I can kind of make my collection. But it's interesting.
The Banff Pavilion, is it special inside or anything that's unique about it inside?
No, it's just, it's like a dance hall. It's a big open space here. There's floor plans here you can see. There was 3 large fireplaces. At one end is the ladies' area, and the other end is the men's area, change and washrooms. And then at the front, right along here, there was all these doors, and there would be 2 sets of doors that would, like accordion, they'd push in, and then so that'd make a nice wide space. So then if you opened all the doors up, then it just opened up. This porch in that area made it a large area, so people could wander in and out, and
Would they
that.
have weddings there? What kind of events? Would they
I think they probably would have, yes. You know, I think that's the way they did, and that's probably what people would do today if they rebuilt it. So I'm not trying to rebuild it. I'm at the end of my road, basically, and so I'm not trying to do things like that. But this is, I don't get the work I got 3 or 4 years ago because computers took all my work away, and I just can't stop working. So this is why, and then I found this thing I love, so I'm doing it. And I don't know whatever's going to happen to my collection. You guys can buy it from me or something like that. I hear you got $5,000.
There you go.
That's a good down payment. All right, any other, oh, sorry.
One more, mostly for postcard collectors in the room, Sid or Neil or anyone, has anyone ever seen a postcard of the Banff Pavilion? Because it seems to me it's right in the middle of the golden age of postcards, you know?
It is. If you look on the internet, there's quite a few of them.
Oh, is there?
And there's actually, like I've got a couple here, but these are just newspaper articles, old photographs, and I think I've seen postcards with some of those pictures on them. And I've been looking, you know, like I got a friend, Sheldon, and one friend, and he's kind of a collector, and so he's been collecting Frank Lloyd Wright stuff. But I've only found 2 items in the last 5 years. You know, like that poster right there. I got that about 40 years ago, and it was one of the industrial manufacturers, and they had those printed up or designed printed up, and they sent them out to architects and engineers. And that's, I got a set of them. There was Mies van der Rohe and Frank Lloyd Wright and probably Corbusier, and there was pictures and a little blur. So anyways, I found that, and that's actually, if I got anything in a collection, it's older and it's value, you know. I saw on the internet, I looked yesterday, and there was somebody sold one for $97. And then the only, you know, I bought this spoon. I phoned the gift shop, and he did just a serving set, and it was a ginkgo tree, and so there's just a little design, and they were going out of production, and I thought, well, I'll buy that. But I found when I was in Seattle, I went into a thrift store, and I was just looking in a case, and there was kind of a cloth like that, and there was something inside of it. And I said to the lady, I said, can I see what that is? And it was the Sprite statues that are here, somewhere. Sprite statues are here, and it was the letter opener with that little statue on. And those are out of production. So things, all the gifts that are in the gift shops they can go out of production. You know, probably for after 10 years or something like that. And then Sheldon bought a table runner, and it was kind of one of the stained glass designs. So those are the only two things that we've actually found. You know, I found one at the thrift store, and Sheldon got one up at the show about 4 years ago. So it's pretty rare. So if you want to be a Frank Lloyd Wright collector, you're not going to collect too much unless you're an artist.
So what's happened to his children? Did any of them follow in his footsteps, or are they, guardians of his?
Yeah, there's architects. Do you know? The only thing I can remember, we were in Arizona, and then we went up towards Grand Canyon, and there's it's a town. It's called Sarah something, and it's all the red rocks and stuff. Sedona. And there's a church that's kind of this shape, right up on the hillside. That was his son that designed that, Lloyd Wright. You know, so that's one building I know. And Lloyd Wright was, I think he was in Arizona and did some things.
I just read yesterday that one of his sons, and when you mentioned the logs, the little toys, his son started the Lincoln Log.
That's right. That might be Lloyd Wright also. I can remember reading that, yes.
John
Lloyd Wright?
Lloyd Wright, I think
Yes,
it was.
I think you're right.
Yes.
And I read that once, and I've always used that. I forgot about that. I had a little diary book that was a lady that was there. She and her husband were at Taliesin for 2 years, and she wrote daily. She was helping him with his biography, but she had to cook and she had to work in the garden. They all had to do everything. He said when he wrote letters back to the people who were trying to become apprentices, he'd say, well, yes, welcome, we're coming, we're going to start at this date. Bring any tools you have. Because they had to make everything. Taliesin West was all handmade. It's so amazing. If the walls are all this rock in cement, and it's so fantastic that I don't know. I was invited back a couple more times this spring to teach more and things like that, but it's too expensive to go down there.
Do you have plans for more illustrations
Of what?
in this vein? Like
Yeah, I want to do falling water. I've got a drawing already started on that, and I'd like to do a pen and ink drawing because that's what I like to do. And then I'll probably make a print. Make a print and color it. I do that, like some of my drawings, like that one is actually it's actually a printed picture, a pen and ink drawing, and then I would watercolor it. Now that one, I've pencil crayoned it, so just as a color study, because I want to color that in watercolor. And I would do the same thing with falling water. When I was on Vancouver Island last year, or 2 years ago, I met a young man that builds furniture, and he loves Frank Lloyd Wright, so he's building Frank Lloyd Wright style furniture, and people do it all the time. So I went up to him this summer. This spring we were out there, and I went up to Duncan. I phoned him and said I'd like to come see you. I met you last year. So I went in there. And he said, hi, we shook hands. And then I had my two prints, the little print. I had the black and white and the color. And I said, oh, here. And he said, what's this? And I said, just a couple of prints I did. And he said, oh, well, how much are they? And I said, no, they're a gift. You know, just a gift. He says, oh, okay, well, you know. He said, well, are you sure there's nothing I can do for you? I said, well, I've done that a few times. Well, I got a guy to do a whole patio for me this last summer because I said, well, he wanted me to do a painting for him in Italy, and I did. So anyways, so this guy's name's Curtis. He does gorgeous, gorgeous cherry wood beds and tables, fantastic tables, you know. And so I said, well, I'd like to, how'd I put that? I'd like you to do a table for me, you know, a little table. And he says, well, what kind? And maybe I said, I'd like to trade you. And he said, well, what do you mean? And I said, well, I'd like you to do a small table. And it's just a little square table he did for the Martin House. One of those houses he did. It's supposed to be his most perfect piece of furniture, you know, table style, out of all his furniture, that this is the deal. And it's a great little table. So I wanted one of those. So when I do shows, I can use it as with a little, you know, something on top of it. And so I said, well, I'd like you to, I'll trade you, you know. Well, what do you mean? I said, well, I'll do a painting for you. And I said, I'd like you to do a table. And he says, well, how do we trade? And I said, well, tell me what would a table cost? Like that. No, he said, what kind of? So we looked it up on the internet. And he said, oh yeah. He said, well, I'd love to build that. He said, but build you one. I'll build one for myself. And he said, I said, well, how much would you charge me? You know? He said, well, $900. And I said, I'll do you a $900 painting. And he said, oh. He says, well, how do you know where to start? I said, I'm fine. I overdo it. You know, I usually give you more than you give me. So, yes.
You've used the terms Taliesin West and Falling Water. For those of us who don't know what those are, maybe you could tell us what they are?
Well, he had a home in Wisconsin named Taliesin East. And he was in Chicago. When he got divorced, he built himself Taliesin West. And that on his home farm, his family's farm. So then in the 30s, he'd gone to Arizona because the dry weather was good for his whatever he had, and he was 70 years old, and then so he decided, I don't know, a few years later they went back, and then he bought this piece of property where Taliesin West is, and that was his home, and it was basically his studio. You know, he experimented with everything there. And the way they live and everything like that. So now, the school still runs. I think it's the smallest architecture school in the world. 20 students, I think, something like that. But they have a vast following. The people that you know, belong to the fellowship. And there's my fellowship ring somewhere. No. Don't I have a little red thing on me? Yeah. That's my fellowship pin. So I belong, and I get the magazine, and they write me letters and ask for money and stuff like that. So I haven't answered them yet. Maybe when I get rich. But so anyways, and then what it was Falling Water. That it was a client of his, you know, big department store owner in Chicago or something like that. And he wanted him to do a house for him. And they had this property, and he had an idea with this creek to build a house on, you know, next to the creek. And Frank Lloyd Wright said, no, we're going to build it with the creek running right through it. You know, and that's where, there's a picture somewhere, a couple of them over there. And then so the little waterfalls runs right through. But yeah. He's got, I think I'm going to get this a little wrong, but the 100 most famous buildings in the United States, 100 most famous over the last 100 years, He has 11 of them on that list. Then the next architect to him has 2. Then everybody else is just, whoever's on that list has 1. So that's how amazing